I emerged into this area where I was flanked on both sides by these benevolent spirits, beings. They were there to support me unconditionally, like loving me unconditionally. They were really tall, humanoid, beige, and it's like they were wearing drapes, like had cloth draping them, and they didn't have any faces. And they communicated to me through feeling that I could stay in that place or I could go to what came after that, which really didn't have a sense of. But I felt like it was like another plane of existence. Or I could return back from where I came. And I didn't have any recall of being human. So I didn't know what that was.
Hello, thank you for tuning in. My name is Nella, and welcome to my podcast, Ethereality. Today's guest is Krista Gorman. She had a near-death experience during childbirth, and what was really unique about this experience was that when she was outside of her body, she had zero recollection of ever being a human. There are many facets of her story that are just as unique, and I'm excited to explore them with you today. Krista, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So why don't you go ahead and start telling us about your near-death experience story?
Okay. My story, it happened in July of 2000. So coming up on almost 24 years ago, I was laboring with my daughter. And during the labor, she had a medical emergency. She had to be delivered quickly by C-section. I'm a medical provider, so I'm a PA. And the emergency was that her heart rate dropped very low, very quickly. And it only has to happen one time during labor for that to be an indication for an emergency C-section. So they don't wait around and just kind of see what happens, see if her heart rate comes up. They just go. So they were in the middle of putting a monitor on my daughter's scalp. It's like a metal coil that they screw into the soft tissue because the scalp, that fontanelle hasn't closed. So it's soft tissue. They actually put the monitor right there. And I had an epidural already, so I didn't feel anything. But then as the nurse midwife was doing that, I started to feel fluttering in my chest. And I was like having a hard time catching my breath. My mother was sitting next to me, and my ex-husband had just left the room. And I turned to my mother and I said, "I'm having trouble breathing." And right away, there was a nurse there with the nurse midwife. They both jumped up, pulled my mother out of the room, turned me on my left side, put oxygen on my face. I heard them calling code blue, and they started wheeling me out of the room. That was within 5 seconds. I mean, they moved so fast. And I was gasping for air by that point. I was in the hallway, moving across the hallway into the OR for the emergency delivery. It was like trying to suck air through this teeny tiny little straw. I was like this, just trying to get air into my lungs, and I couldn't. And then everything started to just go dark. As that was happening, it's like when people have experienced passing out, things just start to go dark. Next thing you know, you wake up and you're like, oh, did I pass out? It was very similar to that. But as that was happening, that darkness was starting to come in my eyes, like we're closing or whatever. I felt this sense of peace just come over, like from behind me and over me. I was completely peaceful. Then the next moment of my awareness, I could see, and I was me, I was Krista, as I know myself within myself. I was very high above, my body was below, but I didn't know it was my body. And it was laying there, people around it. And I was looking at it, and I watched as these black particles came racing up from the body, and in like different concentrations in different parts of the body. And they raced up to where my vision was. I was sort of like this undulating static cloud. And I was very neutral, detached. Like I didn't have any reference for anything. I didn't have a reference for being human. I didn't have any understanding of anything in the physical world. And I was just interested. I was like, oh, okay. This is interesting. And I looked down and I saw my daughter being born, and her being handed to someone at my right shoulder who took her and turned around, and I couldn't see what was going on. And I felt curiosity. I was like, oh, what's that? I want to know what that is. And I drifted around to the other side of the room, the other side of me where I was, still looking down, and I saw that they were putting a catheter in my chest. And that measures the pulmonary pressure in the pulmonary artery vein. And I felt myself being more curious, wanting to know, like really strongly wanting to know what was going on. And having that feeling of like the tip of the tongue phenomena, like, I know what this is, I just can't put my finger on it kind of thing, kind of feeling. And then I felt something tug, and I resisted because I wanted to stay and find out what was going on. It pulled harder, pulled again and harder this time. And I just knew I need to go. And I felt, okay, just kind of relaxed into it. That's how I can best describe it. And I started moving towards the left, and the wall in the room was like liquidy. And there was a wallpaper border on the top. And I went through the wall into this bright white space. And the space was just for a flash. And then I moved out of there into an area of space that was the same particulate matter that I was, only much more of it, much more dense and together and like conglomerated, I guess you could say. And all the while I'm moving like imperceptibly fast in this space. I look this way, and the wall is like dense, dark particles, and they're mostly black, but there's some gray in there. And then at points it became like liquidy. And it was like liquid grayish, whitish, black, different shades, I guess you could say. And then it would become the dense particles again. And then all of a sudden I stopped. I was looking ahead, and I had this download, and it was super, super fast. It was all the questions I'd ever had in my existence, all answered. And it all boiled down to one point, and it was love. Love was the answer. I just felt that love. I felt that it just permeated me. It was like bliss. It was all encompassing. It was eternal. It was beyond time. Eternal doesn't even really describe it adequately, because eternal is like a period of time, but time wasn't there.
So when you got that download, did you at that point realize everything that you were kind of forgetting that was on the tip of your tongue about your body and your life back here?
No, it was like the answer didn't matter. The human 3D answer explanation didn't matter.
Okay.
It all boiled down to love. Love was the answer to everything. Love was everything. So then I was like, oh, like illuminated, this bliss. And I looked to my right, and down far away was this little speck of white. I saw it, and I had the desire to go to it. So desire existed there, intention existed there, curiosity, detached observation, like not being attached to anything, neutrality, I should say, and this deep, all-encompassing love. I wanted to go to the white space, so I started moving that direction. And as I approached, it got wider and bigger, and it was sort of like cloudy white, and there were these shadow beings in there. There were like adult-sized shadow beings. They were behind and sort of surrounding a little boy who was in the front of them. And he had this round, wide brim hat and overalls. I perceived him to be about 7 years old, and he needed my help. He was sort of communicating that to me. It was all through feeling. I felt him communicating that, and I felt I wanted to help him. So I went into that opening, and the shadow beings sort of fanned out in a line to the left, and it sort of allowed me in, gave me room. And then the little boy was gone. Once I was inside that space, again, it was like a white, cloudy kind of atmosphere. And these shadow beings were very indistinct. They were shaped like humans, arms and legs and a head, but I couldn't see faces, and I couldn't make out any distinct fingers or any human qualities. That's why I say they were like humanoid. They were taking this shape so that I could recognize them, so I could identify with them on some level. That's how I understand it to be now. When I was in that space, I felt they all needed my help. And I felt within my energy there, I wanted to help all of them. So then they started to dart at me one by one and dart back, like go back to where they were. They come at me and go back. And they started doing this kind of sporadically all around. And I felt my energy diminishing. And I felt like I was going to not exist anymore if I didn't do something. So I felt I want to leave. As soon as I felt that, I was pulled out of there. Like the universe took me out and I was back in the dense particles again. And for a much briefer period of time, I then went through another opening that was very indistinct within this black particulate matter, but it was round. And I went through that and I emerged into this gorgeous atmosphere of green rolling hills and beautiful yellow flowers and an evergreen forest to my right and a rock covered, like mossy waterfall. And trees were dotting the hills in the distance. And there was this sun off somewhere, but the light was shining and the blue sky. And it was just completely gorgeous and completely divine. And I just merged with all of it. I just felt the flowers. I felt the trees and the grass and all of it. And I was one with it. It felt like I could have stayed there eternally, forever. Then I was flanked on both sides by these beings that were sort of tall and lean, beige colored. They were like drapey. And they didn't have faces, but they were, again, like a human kind of figure. And they communicated through feeling. And they felt to me, you could stay here. You could go beyond this to what comes next, or you could go back. I was being given the choice. I didn't have any recall of being human or what going back would be. I didn't know what came after. I didn't really have a sense of that. Although I knew that if that were, I would be like crossing a barrier, almost like crossing into another realm, or I could stay there. I call it my Eden because it was just so divine and so perfect. And it was me and I was it. I could have existed there for eternity. I found myself choosing to go back. As soon as I felt that, I started moving backwards very quickly, but I could still see. And the beings sort of turned towards me as the opening was getting smaller. As I got further away, they communicated to me, if you go back, you need to share what you learned here. And I felt back, okay. And then the next thing I remember, I had a terrible pain in my chest, and I think I was moaning. And then I have a memory of hearing commotion, and I was in a hospital bed. I detached myself from everything I was attached to, and I climbed over the railing and I landed on the ground, and I was like trying to get my bearings. It's almost as if my legs were going to hold me. There was a curtain around the bed, and I threw the curtain open to see what was going on because there was this commotion, and it was all my family just outside the ICU where I was, and they were all like in a huddle. I remember seeing my dad's head pop up, and he's like, whoa. And the nurses were on me. My family was on me, like getting me back into bed and getting me all hooked up again. And I was so mad. And I said to the nurse, I'm a physician assistant and I'm going to be working for, and I named the doctor that I actually had a job lined up with. I had just graduated from PA school 3 weeks before that. And I had this job I was going to be starting. That came from somewhere. I don't know where, but I had that memory. And I blurted it out in my frustration at this nurse. And she just looked at me like a deer in the headlights. She's like, okay. And she wrote it in quotes in my chart, what I said. Oh, yeah. So that was my near-death experience.
That's funny. I love that.
I know. I can totally laugh at it. My family was completely on the verge of nervous breakdowns because of everything that happened. But here I was. I wasn't in any trauma. I was like kind of blissed out.
But you're like, I don't belong in this hospital bed.
No, I wanted to go home.
Yeah, I would too. After you got back, how long did it take you to realize that your experience during that was unusual?
I didn't recall right away. My family noticed a big difference in me right away. Before that, I had been very type A. I was a PA student for 2 years. And for 2 years prior to that, I was a pre-PA student. I was taking mathematics and science courses and getting all my prerequisites done to apply to PA school, and then spent an intense 2 full years in PA school. And I was very focused. I was very science-based, evidence-based, kind of an intense personality in that way. You know, when I woke up in the ICU, I had an amniotic fluid embolism. And then I started to bleed out. So I had to be transfused. And that was due to my body's inability to clot my blood. And that can happen after an amniotic fluid embolism. But after 36 hours of being intubated, they pulled the tube because I was very stable. And they were weaning me off the medication that they had me on to have the tube in to keep me sedated. And that's when I climbed out of the bed. But I didn't remember that I was married. I didn't remember I had had a baby. I thought I had had twins. Then I thought I had a boy and had a girl. All the while, I'm just very calm. And there's video of me. And I have this look about me that's like my face is just sort of blank. And I'm just looking around at people and observing them and sort of laughing in all the right places. You know, people making jokes or whatever, because all my family was there. And yet I remember internally, all of it was good, but none of it mattered. I had short-term memory loss. So I kept telling my brother I liked his shirt and asking him where he got it, like every 5 minutes. And he very patiently like said the same thing every time. But as the week went by, I stayed there. Every day I became more and more aware of things, me, what was around me. I was in the hospital. I had had what they think was an amniotic fluid embolism. I had died and come back. And when they told me that part, I was like, but I'm okay now. Like, it's okay. I remember thinking, you guys are so serious. You really need to lighten up.
So you did actually have a medical report of like your heart stop.
Yes, it's in my chart.
Yeah.
They lost my pulse at 9:18 in the morning, and they felt a pulse again at 9:26. And during that period of time, that window, my daughter was delivered by emergency C-section, and they were trying to stabilize me. I was bleeding everywhere. I was bleeding uncontrollably, and they were trying to get the bleeding to stop and get me closed up and then get me into the ICU so they could stabilize me further. That took a little while. In the process of that, they had to put a tube down my throat. They did do CPR, but they had to stop for about a minute and a half while they delivered Maggie. So during that period of time is when I believe I left my body. I could see what was going on. They delivered my daughter. I had this experience, and then they brought me back. They had resumed chest compressions at that point, and then they got a pulse, and I recovered from there.
One thing that struck me as very interesting was when you were in that place with those shadow beings, based off of your understanding, how would you explain what that was about? Do you have any sort of idea what the shadow beings could have been? Do you think it was symbolic, or what have you made of that?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. I feel like it's a mix. You know, it took me a little while to understand the shadow beings. And I came to an understanding only after I was introduced to the idea of a law of attraction. And that really actually explained how I felt during my near-death experience as well. This feeling of intention and then in a desire, and it manifesting immediately in this resistance-free environment I was in. So the shadow being piece was twofold. I feel that my experience was co-created with the loving universe. I was sort of checking in to see, okay, Krista, you're going to have people who want to use your energy. The lesson there was to choose me first. I had to choose me first, and I did it. And
I love that.
Yeah, it was like, I've learned it over and over again here, man. Since then. It's like even lately, oh my gosh, when you come into the world as a we, not an I, it's so challenging to not cross that line of giving too much of yourself once again, because for the collective, for the greater good, you know, the good of everyone, we're so connected with one another quantumly. You cannot sever it. And when people are in varying degrees of understanding of that, that directs their behavior. So for me, the times when I'm feeling most connected to everything, everyone, I tend to cross that line into giving too much of myself and not reserving, you know, what I need to thrive, or not making choices for me to thrive. I'd rather you thrive. Like, I want to see you thrive because it makes me feel so good. But I have to give that to myself in order to continue to be energized so that I can help, you know. So that was a big lesson for me. I chose me.
If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please hit that like button and subscribe. Also, if you've enjoyed my content before, or maybe you're new here, but you like it, drop a comment and let me know you're here. I would love to get to know my audience. Thank you for listening, and let's get back to the content.
The entities that were there were not malevolent by any stretch of the imagination, not malevolent at all. They agreed to be there for me to learn that lesson. At the same time, they were serving themselves on their journey in the other realm. I feel that they manifested their energy into these shadow beings for me. So they were serving me in that sense.
Happening for you, not to you.
Yeah, exactly.
With you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
With me. Yeah.
Yes. I love that. And when you went into the next space and you're explaining like all the forest and the meadow and the waterfall and everything, have you seen the movie What Dreams May Come?
No, I haven't seen that yet.
Oh my goodness, you have to watch it.
Yes.
It's the first thing I thought of immediately when you started explaining it, and it's just like yours. You have to watch it.
Oh, wow. Yes, I will definitely.
Like, had you heard about near-death experiences before your experience?
No, my recall of my experience came to me during sleep, which is when we connect to the greater consciousness, right? So it was given to me in its entirety as if I was experiencing it then, which was phenomenal, like phenomenal, because I had spent weeks before that slowly recovering from my brain injury, from this lack of oxygen to my brain. You know, the brain heals. In my experience, it heals in layers. So I would literally wake up in the morning once or twice a week, feeling a little bit more like the old Krista. I felt more like myself, quote unquote. But right afterwards, I was like walking around, going through the motions. Like I intuitively knew how to take care of my daughter. No one taught me. I just knew what to do. And I just did it. I didn't second guess myself. I just acted. And my mother was there for a couple of weeks and she just let me go. Like she was there to sort of supervise, make sure I didn't like do something, you know, I shouldn't be doing, I guess. But she was watching me and she's like, no, you did wonderfully. You did beautifully with Maggie. You met her needs when they needed to be met. I saw a video of me walking from our bedroom to my daughter's nursery. And my ex-husband had the video camera, you know, out and he's filming me. And I just went up to him, was like smiling. I'm like, hey, how's it going? I looked like I was on drugs. I wasn't. I was blissed out. I was just so content and peaceful. I had no anxiety, no worries, no nothing. It was just this beautiful space of just being. I can liken it to probably about 60% of what I felt in my near-death experience. It's how I felt then. And then that slowly began to fade over the weeks that went by as I became more and more the old Krista. Every time I woke up, and I was missing the Krista I was when I came out of my NDE, you know, when I came out of the coma and out of the ICU, you know, I was missing her. I didn't really understand that there was truly something there until I sent an email to Dr. Jeff Long, because becoming more and more like the old Krista, I started to doubt myself. I started to doubt what I had re-experienced through sleep in my dream. Like, I'll call it a dream because that's the easiest thing to say, but it was hyper real. It was realer than life itself. But I was doubting it. I was questioning it. You know, I was trying to share my experience with people, but with people that had never had one and didn't understand. So that sort of reinforced that side of me that was like, oh, you probably just hallucinated. And then I found Dr. Long because I wanted to find a medical provider, somebody in the medical field who was interested in near-death experiences that I could maybe relate to. So I sent him an email and I said, I think something may have happened when I had my daughter. And he emailed me back almost right away. And he said, oftentimes it's something that people question. And he said, just pay attention to your dreams. And I hadn't told him I'd had a dream. I hadn't told him anything. I said, I think maybe something had happened. That's all I said. And I was purposefully vague with him because I didn't want him to think I was crazy. And when he said that, that was the validation that I really needed in order to open up to beginning to accept that this had happened, and then try to navigate that road of integrating back into my life. and figuring out how to be the Krista I was in my NDE in my 3D life, where had all these expectations placed on me and these demands placed on me, and working in the medical field, and being a wife and new mother. It was a lot.
So at what point did you feel confident enough to start sharing your story publicly?
Around 2013. And trust me, like, I was so reluctant to talk publicly about what I had experienced. I was terrified to share my story. But when there's something that nags at you over and over and over, and you cannot ignore it, and you just have to address it, and then you're so glad that you did. That was my journey with sharing. At that point in 2013, I had come to a place where I was able to integrate my experience and understand it on a much deeper level than I ever had before. And it was only through the sort of journey of life between 2000 and 2013 that helped me to do that. Going through a lot of shit, going through a hard time, going through these episodes of deep self-exploration, and how am I relating in the world, and is this really me, and how do I get to me again? And all the while my NDE's right here in the back of my mind, every single minute of every single day, like saying, talk, come on, you need to look at me, take a look, really focus on me. And only when I was emotionally beaten down and there was like this crisis within my immediate family did I finally just give up and just say, okay, my ego over there, I'm ready to focus on the love, and focus on the message, and focus on sharing it. So I started to meditate every day and journal afterwards, and I created a sort of a blueprint for myself to follow in my everyday life, integrating the law of attraction into that, understanding that was a big part of my NDE, that energy of what we call the law of attraction and the energy of love, integrating the two. And then my life began to change in major ways, and so aligned. I was so aligned with everything. I then wrote a little book called I Died and Learned How to Live. That was my big step into this world. And I attended IANDS in Newport Beach that year. That was 2014 is when I went there. And I left copies of my book in the bookstore, and I did like a workshop there, and I did a half-hour talk. A person in the NDE community saw my book, picked it up, brought it back to Seattle, brought it to the Seattle IANDS meeting and shared there. And that ultimately led me being brought to the attention of Morgan Freeman's research team for his show, Story of God. And my daughter and I were invited to be on the show, interviewed by him, and be on his show in 2016. So stepping into the fear with courage and stepping through it, it opened all these doors, and it opened me up to a community that I didn't even know I needed, really, that was just waiting for me. The NDE spiritually transformative community is the most loving group of people I've ever encountered.
It really is. I feel so blessed to be a part of it. I mean, I didn't even have a near-death experience, but it just kind of landed in my lap and became my life, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. Welcome.
Welcome. If you don't mind me asking, the crisis in your immediate family, was that potentially brought on by the change in you?
Yeah, partially it was. Yeah, I had been denying myself for 10 or 11 years within my marriage, and had been doing exactly what the shadow beings had taught me that I didn't need to do, which is putting everybody else first. My ex-husband became really ill. We thought he basically had a terminal illness at one point. I felt like I was just being bombarded by these energies that made me stop and be present right now, right here, and no other place. So I learned that. I learned to be present and to have all my energy right here, right now. And once I did that, I was like, everything became so clear. And it was like, nothing matters. Nothing but love matters. I was like, I've got to work on bringing myself back to that space of just love is it. I am love. And once I was able to do a little bit better at that, then my life started to change for the better. we sort of moved out of that and into another sort of space of, okay, now let's reassess. And it helped to crack me open and bring myself forth into the world more than I ever had before. It wasn't the last time that happened, but it was definitely a defining point in my existence here.
So has he recovered?
My ex-husband?
Yeah. You said you thought at one point it was terminal, but
yeah, he had to undergo some pretty significant like medical procedures, but he has bounced back, and yeah, he's doing really well.
Good.
We're close. We're like one big family.
That's good.
Yeah.
If you had any sort of spiritual belief or faith-based or anything before your experience, did it change? What did that before versus after look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was raised Catholic. I felt like I had a really close relationship with Christ consciousness, with Jesus, like who he was, who he is, because he's an ascendant master. But that Christ consciousness, I always strive to be like Christ in his teachings, right? The religious practice and the dogma I wasn't interested in. And I also had the spirituality with nature. Like nature is my temple. That's where I go when I am struggling energetically. I go to nature.
Same.
Yeah.
I've written some poetry about it.
If you would like to share, I would love to read.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mother Nature is our mother. This earth is a womb of us, and we're in it. She is our protector. And being on Maui really brought this home to me. She will help us. She will support us when we're going through shit. She will love us unconditionally, no matter what we do to her. She may lash out in her fury at times, like any entity, any being would, who has maybe been pushed a little too far. But that's the beauty of her. She is herself, and that's it. She doesn't make excuses. She doesn't, she accepts all of her. We can model ourselves after Mother Nature.
And is this kind of a perspective that you had before your near-death experience, or a perspective that you've developed since?
I had an affinity to nature before my experience. It's my understanding that there's like a part of ourselves, our physical, even physicality, our spirituality that exists in the universe still. And we're here, that we're only partially manifested in these physical bodies. So there's this like greater part of ourselves that's still there. And Esther Hicks talks about it in Law of Attraction and stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's how it is. So that guide for me has always been there. I've always been drawn to, nature, made choices to be closer to nature when I can. But in my experience, I was nature. I am. That to me is like my higher power here on this physical earth are the trees and the grass and animals and insects and everything.
And you said that you weren't really interested in the religious aspects of Catholicism. Did it cause any sort of a conflict in your mind and your heart regarding the things that the Catholic Church claims?
I actually understand it a lot better since I had my near-death experience. And that was through studying Joseph Campbell and his work. He studied mythologies around the world, including religious mythologies. I had a new understanding of the Catholic religion through understanding his work. I've learned that I am God, and that the icons that we pray to are reflections of us, and we're reflections of them. And they are not the end. The beauty, the mystery of our existence doesn't stop at the statue of Mary or the statue of Joseph or Jesus on the cross. It transcends that. It's beyond that. And what the icons do is it hints at the mystery. The mystery is not it. It's like poetry, that you spoke about, writing poetry. It's the space between the words. It's the pauses that brings in that majesty of the experience of the words of the poem. And all of us have our own interpretation of that, our own experience. And we're free to have that, Definitely, I am not in a box. I don't follow rules in that regard. I do my own thing. I do what feels right.
I love that. I feel like a lot of people who are very religious look at this near-death experience community and a lot of the spiritualist stuff and see it as really bad. Like, don't go there, that it's demonic and all that jazz. But then a lot of people on the spiritual side of things or who have had near-death experiences will look at religion and be like, that's all wrong. And there's just this division between these two communities. And I truly feel like there shouldn't be. These two things can exist simultaneously. Like, we can coexist.
Yeah, just in my own understanding and experience regarding different belief systems and what people adhere to, a lot of it is ego-based. And when we are making decisions, judgments based in ego, then that inherently carries within it a level of an error on our part. Although in my experience, there are no errors because even that's purposeful. That leads you to the next thing or leads that other person to the next thing. We like to believe that we have the answers. I had this death experience. I don't have all the answers. Although I was given all those answers in my NDE, it wasn't like I was told the answer to this question is this, the answer to this question is this. It was just a generality and then love. Love is the answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you're in love, you cannot simultaneously be in ego. So love is the absence of fear. Ego is the equivalent of fear in my experience.
And that's where I was going to take it too, is that when you just root yourself in love, then there's no point to division. Mm-hmm. We are all one. We're all coming from the same source. We're all part of each other, reflections of each other. Mm-hmm. So love is the answer.
That's it. It's that simple.
And I think that's an excellent place to end our meeting. And it's been such a pleasure speaking with you.
Oh, you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. If you loved this episode, please consider leaving a review. If you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so we don't lose each other. And to share the link with somebody who can appreciate this message. Blessings to you all, and I hope to catch you on my next episode.